Hi there, this is Ellie, your narrator. I hope you are ready to relax and hear the story of a powerful polar bear king who is wounded and forced to live with an unusual new appearance. When others mock and challenge him, he proves that true strength and leadership come from within. It teaches that dignity and courage matter far more than outward appearance. Far to the north, where the sea hardens into floating mountains and the sun circles low and bright through long summer nights, there lies a kingdom without walls. Its towers are jagged ice, its banners are the auroras that ripple green and violet across the sky, and its people are the white bears who roam from floe to floe. This is the country of the king of the polar bears, an ancient monarch wrapped in silver fur whose reign is older than the memory of men. This is the story of how he lost his famed white coat, how he wore the gift of the gulls, and how, in a battle beneath the cold sun, he learned what makes a true king. Chapter 1. Monarch of Ice and Silence. In the wide stillness of the polar sea, icebergs drift like forgotten palaces. Between them, the water lies dark and deep, its surface broken now and then by the sleek head of a seal or the flash of a hunting gull. On one such berg, higher and broader than the rest, rose a cavern whose entrance was crusted with frost. This was the hall of the king of the polar bears. He was a giant among his kind, massive beyond any ordinary bear, with shoulders that looked hewn from packed snow and paws heavy enough to crack the thin ice with a single careless step. His fur, long and dense, covered him from nose to tail in a coat of pure white that glowed under the strange level light of the midnight sun. When he walked across the floes, that fur shimmered as though spun of moonlight and the dust of stars. His claws, curved and strong, were tools as well as weapons. With them, he found footing on treacherous surfaces where a misstep meant death in the black water below. With them, he could grip the slippery bodies of seals and fish, tearing them swiftly so that hunger never stayed with him long. The seals, clever in their own way, feared the sound of his approach. They kept a wary distance from his favored hunting holes, for they knew that where the king went, death followed in soft padded silence. The wolves of the northern lands, gray and lean, sometimes ventured near the edge of the ice in search of food, and when they scented him, they whispered among themselves that he must be favored by some strange power. Nothing in the world, they said, seemed able to harm him. Yet for all his strength, the king of the polar bears was not a brute tyrant. He moved with a stately calm that arose from long experience. The ordinary polar bears who dwelt scattered across the floes regarded him with respect and a measure of awe. They came to him when sickness troubled them, or when some puzzle in the ice or the weather or the strange migration of fish required a wiser mind than theirs. In front of his cavern, at certain seasons, a half-circle of bears could be seen, their thick bodies sprawled upon the ice, while the king sat upright, listening to their concerns. He spoke seldom, but when he did, his voice was deep and deliberate, and his words, though simple, carried the weight of hard winters, survived, and dangers met. To the gulls who wheeled ceaselessly overhead, he was a generous sovereign. After a successful hunt, he seldom consumed all of his catch. What remained, he left upon the ice. The gulls would descend in fluttering clouds, their white and gray wings beating the air as they shrieked and quarreled over the feast. They came to look for his hunts, following him high above as he moved across the frozen world. So his kingdom thrived, bears and gulls and wary seals, each playing their part in a pattern older than memory. For many years, nothing troubled his reign. Snow fell, ice formed and melted with the seasons, storm winds rose and died, and the king grew larger, his strength deepening, his authority unquestioned. But even in the farthest north, where man seldom goes, there comes a time when new things enter an old story. Chapter 2. First Sight of Men. One summer, when the ice thinned and broke apart in wide channels of open water, the king emerged from his cavern and stood upon a ridge of ice that overlooked a newly opened lane through which the sea moved dark and calm. He sniffed the air. There was a scent unlike any he had known, neither fish, nor seal, nor bear, nor wolf. It was sharp and layered, carrying hints of smoke, metal, strange oils, and something else, an odor of many creatures gathered together. Out upon the water a small boat moved, its prow cutting the smooth surface, leaving a trailing wake. In it sat men, creatures unlike anything the king had seen. They were smaller than bears, upright, wrapped in thick garments, and they handled objects that gleamed dully in the pale light. Curiosity, that old and often dangerous impulse, rose in him. He did not yet know that men were the most perilous hunters in all the earth. He had faced storms that tore icebergs apart, whales that thrashed the sea into foam, male bears driven half mad by hunger, and from all such encounters he had emerged with little more than scars. His wisdom knew how to read wind, snow, and beast, but it had no chapter yet on this new creature. So he advanced. His great paws made little noise. His breath steamed. The men, intent on their own purpose, did not at first notice him. When he came nearer, one of them turned, saw the towering white shape upon the ice, and cried out. The others twisted around. Their faces showed something the king recognized from lesser animals: fear. Yet there was no panic. Instead, one of the men raised a long, narrow object to his shoulder. The king did not know that this was an instrument fashioned to throw death farther than any claw might reach. He did not know that the dull gleam of metal along its length carried a fire trapped in powder. He watched, puzzled, as the man squinted along the object and pulled at some small piece with his finger. A burst of sound split the air. To the king, it was as if the very sky had cracked, an abrupt, unnatural noise that echoed off the ice. At the same instant, a blow struck him with greater force than any paw had ever delivered. His limbs shuddered. A burning sharpness tore through him, then spread, numbing thought and sense alike. The ice beneath him tilted and swung, though it was in truth his own great body that swayed. The world narrowed to a bright point and then collapsed into darkness. So fell the monarch who had never before known defeat. Chapter 3. Gifts of the Gulls. Time passed, though he did not feel it. When awareness returned, it did so in fragments. First pain, then cold, then the harsh scratch of ice against his skin. He tried to stir, and agony flared across his entire body. Something was wrong. The air, usually filtered through the shelter of his fur, bit directly into his flesh. A chill more profound than the ordinary polar winds sank into him. He opened his eyes. The sky above was filled with circling forms. Gulls, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, wheeled overhead, their wings flashing white and gray. They cried to one another in shrill voices, their words a rapid string of questions and exclamations. The king tried to rise but could not. When he looked down at himself, he saw that his once magnificent coat was gone. The men, seeing no more life in him, had carved away his hide, that rich, thick pelt that had sheltered him through countless storms. They had carried it away to their far-off ship, leaving his huge body naked upon the ice. Pain from many shallow cuts and deeper wounds throbbed with each beat of his heart. The open air pressed upon skin, never meant to feel it, and the cold gnawed at him like teeth. The gulls saw him move. Surprise rippled through their ranks. Many had believed him dead and had hesitated to descend upon his body out of a mixture of respect and uncertainty. Now they understood that their benefactor still lived, though he lay helpless and shivering. They settled upon nearby floes, chattering. The oldest among them recalled how many times the king's kills had fed their young. They saw, too, that without the protection of his fur, he would not live long in this harsh land. From their discussion, a plan arose. One wise gull suggested that since they could not give him back his own lost coat, they might instead share something of theirs. And so, one by one, each gull reached with its beak beneath its wing and plucked out soft feathers, those downy tufts that lie close to the skin, keeping flight muscles warm in bitter wind. It hurt them to do this. The bare patches smarted, and they knew they would feel the cold more keenly for a time. But gratitude can endure pain more easily than ingratitude can endure memory. The sky grew full of falling white as they carried their small offerings down. Gently, they let the feathers drift onto the king's torn hide. A few at first, then tens, then hundreds, and thousands, until his great body was blanketed in a light, downy covering. Their voices rose together. "Be strong," they clamored. "These feathers will lie upon you as your own fur once did. They will keep the worst of the wind away. Live, King of the Bears, live!" The king felt the small impacts, the growing warmth as the pile of feathers thickened. It was not the same as fur grown from his own flesh, but it was something, a soft barrier between him and the cruel air. He closed his eyes, breathed slowly, and willed himself to endure. Day slid into night, night into day in the slow turning of polar time. His wounds began to seal. The feather covering, pressed by his weight and moistened by the dampness of his own body, tangled together and took hold upon his skin. In time, as strange magic sometimes works in places where nature itself seems enchanted, the feathers rooted as if they had always belonged there. They grew, multiplying across his frame until he was as fully clothed as before, but clothed now in plumage rather than fur. Mostly it shone white, though here and there a gray feather lent his appearance a faint mottled sheen. At last he rose, unsteady at first, then firm. His movement stirred the feathers, which rustled faintly as they brushed against one another. He turned his head, glanced down at his altered body, and accepted what his reflection on the ice showed him. His dignity did not depend on the exact garment he wore. For a long while he did not seek out his fellow bears. Shame, subtle but real, tugged at him. Instead he hunted by night and rested by day within his cavern, leaving only enough sign of his presence that the gulls might still find him and share his meals. All the while, memory of the men and their thunderous weapon burned within him. He understood now that here was a danger his previous wisdom had not accounted for, a danger that could fell even the mightiest with a single unseen blow. From that day forward, whenever he caught the faintest hint of the scent of men upon the air, he turned away, moving in the opposite direction with a careful speed that bespoke both caution and restraint. Thus, the king of the polar bears added a new chapter to his store of knowledge, written in pain, but not in regret, for he had survived and grown wiser. Chapter 4. Laughter on the Ice. When the long night had passed and the sun returned to sweep its bright circle low around the horizon, the icebergs gleamed with colors seeming almost impossible in such a cold place. Blue like deep water, pink like the inside of seashells, green as old glass. The sea began to open in wider stretches. The bears stirred from their dens, leaner but alert, each seeking fresh hunting grounds. 2 such bears made their way across the floes toward the king's cavern. They had questions about the new season, where seals might be found in greatest numbers, how far the ice extended, whether any unusual currents or cracks had appeared. For such matters, they trusted the king's judgment. They padded onto the broad shelf of ice before his dwelling and called out respectfully. The king emerged. His step was as heavy and sure as ever, his eyes as clear, but his coat, instead of the expected dense fur, was now a layer of feathers that fluffed and smoothed with each movement. In the bright sunlight, they glittered as white as snow, with faint shadows of gray here and there. The visiting bears stopped short. Surprise widened their dark eyes. For a heartbeat they simply stared. Then one, less careful in speech, barked with laughter. "Our mighty king has turned into a bird," he jeered. "See how he rustles. Who ever heard of a feathered bear?" Something hard moved in the king's chest. He had spent many months alone, tending his wounds and coming to terms with his new form. He had accepted it privately, but he had not yet faced the reaction of others. The mocking tone struck more sharply than any cold wind. Anger rose, a deep, slow anger, not the sharp flare of momentary annoyance. With measured steps, he advanced. The foolish bear did not realize his danger until too late. A single stroke of the king's massive paw, powered by injured pride and ancient strength, sent the mocker sprawling upon the ice, lifeless. The second visitor scrambled backward, shocked. Without another word, he turned and ran, his paws scattering snow. His flight carried the news across the floes. The king had changed. He now wore feathers instead of fur, and he had slain a bear for laughing at him. Fear mingled with curiosity in the minds of those who heard. Soon, a great council of polar bears gathered upon a wide, level field of ice. They sat in a rough circle, their breath forming faint clouds in the cool air, and discussed the matter gravely. "He is no longer as we are," one said. "He wears the dress of birds." "Yet he is still strong," another pointed out. "Our brother who mocked him lies dead to prove it." "Strength alone does not make a king," an older bear argued. "He must be as we are, that he may understand us fully. A half-bear, half-bird is a strange creature. Can such a one rightly rule our kind?" Silence followed as they pondered this. Among bears, as among other creatures, there is a deep instinct to be led by one who seems a reflection of themselves. At last an aged bear, scarred by many winters, spoke. "If any doubts the king's right to rule, let challenger and ruler meet in trial. He who proves stronger shall be king." The circle considered this time-honored solution. No one could dispute the justice of a test that relied not on rumor, but on visible outcome. From among them stepped a massive bear named Woof, known for his size and his confidence in it. He had long coveted the king's place, though he had never dared to act while fur and fortune alike favored the monarch. Now, seeing what he thought an opportunity in the feathered coat, he strode forward. "I will challenge him," Wolf declared. "If this bird bear truly remains our master, let him show it. If not, I shall prove myself the stronger and wear his crown." The council agreed. A messenger was chosen and sent across the ice to the king's cavern, bearing the demand for battle. Chapter 5. The King's Resolve. The king listened to the messenger in silence. The younger bear's eyes kept straying to the feathers that covered his monarch, as if torn between awe and doubt. When the message was delivered that he must either fight Wolf and prove his mastery or step down from his place and yield the rulership to another, the king's gaze turned inward for a moment. He recalled the long years of his reign, the judgments given, the hunts shared, the unspoken trust that had existed between him and his people. He remembered, too, the moment when ridicule had pierced him more deeply than any man's bullet. "I wear feathers because it is the covering my life now permits," he said at last, his voice low. "The gulls gave me what they could, and I accepted their kindness. My strength, my mind, my duty, these have not changed." He lifted his head. "Yet the custom of our kind is clear. If a bear doubts the rightful king, the question is settled in combat. I will not cling to my place with excuses. Tell Wolf I will meet him on the 7th day from now, upon the wide ice field. If he overcomes me, let him rule. If not, let the matter rest." The messenger bowed his head and departed. When he was gone, the king called for the gulls. At his summons they came, swooping down from their airy paths to settle around him in a restless, fluttering circle. He told them of the challenge, of Wolf's boast, of his own determination to face what must be faced. "My people are not wrong to wish for a leader who resembles them," he said. "Yet I would show them that a king's worth lies deeper than his outer coat." The queen of the gulls, older than many storms, listened with keen eyes. When he finished, she spoke of a chance encounter she had recently had with an eagle who had escaped the captivity of men. This eagle, soaring over a city far to the south, had seen something draped over the back of a rolling carriage, the great white skin of a polar bear. The description left little doubt. It could only be the king's own stolen hide. "If you desire, we can send a company of gulls to bring it back," the queen offered. "It will be hard work, but our wings are strong and our gratitude is deep." The king did not allow longing for his old coat to master him, yet he understood what its return would mean, not only in warmth, but in the eyes of his people. "Go then," he said, "let 100 gulls fly south with the rising wind. If they can find my skin, we shall see whether feathers and fur can be joined. If they cannot, I will still stand as I am." The queen gave the command. 100 gulls rose from the ice, formed a glittering stream against the sky, and turned toward the distant horizon, where the sun gleamed over lands unknown. The king watched them until they were specks, then gone. Chapter 6. Journey of the 100 Gulls. The flight southward was long and testing. The gulls were birds of the sea, used to following coastlines and ships. But now they went over vast stretches where ice gave way to open water, then to rocky shores, and finally to lands where green replaced white. They flew in a loose formation, keeping one another in sight, sharing currents of air, resting when they could on outcroppings or driftwood. On the second day, they saw cliffs teeming with other seabirds, and on the third they passed fishing boats whose crews shouted and pointed, astonished by the sudden appearance of such a host. By the fourth day they reached the outskirts of a great city. Smoke from countless chimneys smudged the sky. The smell of it, mingled with odors of food, refuse, and industry, struck the gulls as strange and unpleasant. Yet there was also the tantalizing scent of fish from markets and harbors. But they had not come to feed. They circled above the streets, minds fixed on the eagle's description. Somewhere below, amid the clutter and hum of human life, a carriage rolled with a white bear skin thrown casually across its back. Hours passed as they searched, sweeping low over busy avenues and quieter lanes. Many people looked up, shading their eyes, startled by the sight of so many gulls far from the harbor. Children pointed, dogs barked. At last, as the afternoon slid toward evening, one sharp-eyed gull cried out. There, indeed, moved a carriage drawn by glossy horses, its wheels rattling over stone. Draped across its rear seat was a great white fur, large enough that it brushed the sides. To human eyes, it was merely a luxurious robe for warmth and display. To the gulls, it was a relic of their king. On a signal from their leader, the 100 birds stooped as one. They descended upon the carriage in a flurry of wings, startling the horses and driver. Beaks clamped onto the edges of the fur, here a corner, there an edge, elsewhere a loose fold. With fierce beating of wings, they lifted. The driver shouted, swatted at them with his whip, and tried to maintain control of the frightened horses. Passers-by cried out, ducking as feathered bodies swept close. For a moment, the fur hung between carriage and sky, tugged in both directions. Then, the united strength of 100 gulls prevailed. The robe tore free. Higher and higher they climbed, bearing their prize away. Below, the carriage rolled on, its owner outraged, its driver bewildered. No one would later believe his tale of a coat carried off by a storm of seabirds. Turning northward, the gulls faced the long journey home. The skin was heavy, even when supported by many beaks. They took turns, some dropping back to rest, while others gripped, but always enough held fast to keep it aloft. Days passed again in the air, over fields and rivers, over mountains where the air thinned and cooled, over coasts where waves crashed against rock. They flew by day and rested in shifts by night, always keeping the skin under watch, lest some wandering scavenger attempt to claim it. At last the air grew colder, and ice returned to the sea. The polar regions lay ahead. The seventh day approached like a drawn bowstring. The gulls drove themselves harder, their wings aching, hearts beating like drums. Duty lent them strength beyond their ordinary measure. Chapter 7. Battle on the Wide Ice. While the gulls labored in the sky, the king of the polar bears prepared upon the earth. He sharpened his claws against fractured ridges of ice, carving small channels that glistened like new-made glass. He tested his teeth upon the bones of a seal, ensuring that they still met with crushing force. His feathered coat was cleaned and smoothed by the queen gull and her attendants, who teased out tangles and plucked away any damaged quills. As the appointed day drew near, bears from all around gathered on the broad field chosen for the combat. They spread across the ice in a great ring, leaving the center open. Their breaths formed a low mist that drifted above the frozen surface. Wolf arrived early, pacing, his heavy shoulders rolling with each step. His fur was thick and unblemished, his muscles rippling beneath his coat. He spoke loudly, boasting that feathers would soon scatter like snow when he laid paws on the bird bear. Some laughed, eager for spectacle. Others remained silent, unsure whether they wished to see the fall of the king who had guided them for so long. When at last the king appeared at the edge of the ring, conversation stilled. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, his body held with a kind of dignity that is not mere pride, but the habit of command. The wind tugged at his feathers, making them ripple and lift. He stepped into the clear center and faced Woof. For a moment, the two bears simply regarded each other. In the king's gaze lay long years, and the knowledge of pain endured. In Woof's eyes shone youthful confidence and the hunger for power. The gathered bears felt the tension between them like a physical thing. Woof broke the silence with a shout meant to shake his opponent's composure. He taunted the king about his feathers, threatening to pluck them and send them flying. Some of the onlookers snickered nervously. The king said nothing. His anger did not blaze in dramatic fury. It smoldered in the controlled tightening of his muscles, in the way his claws dug slightly into the ice. He understood that words could not decide this matter. Only action would. At a signal from the eldest bear present, the contest began. Woof lunged, swiping with one great paw. The king sidestepped, the feathers along his shoulder brushing against Woof's claws, but not yielding. He answered with a heavy blow of his own, which Woof deflected, though he staggered under its force. They circled, trading strikes. Ice cracked beneath them, growls rumbled like distant thunder. Twice Woof rushed in, teeth bared, and twice the king met him with such solid resistance that the younger bear's confidence flickered. To sap his opponent's spirit, Woof shouted another insult, proclaiming that he would strip the king's feathers and send him naked across the floes. The attempt at bluster rang thinner this time. Beneath it lay the realization that the fight was not turning as easily as he had expected. The king, hearing the jeer, let his feathers rise. They fluffed outward, making him appear even larger, a white storm cloud of a bear. Then, with a deep roar that seemed to come from the very ice, he surged forward. His paw came down upon Woof's head with all the strength of his great body and the weight of his years. A crack echoed sharply, awful in its finality. Woof's legs folded, he collapsed upon the ice, motionless. A hush fell. The assembled bears stared, not only at their fallen challenger, but at the king who had felled him. In that silence, they were forced to reconsider what they had so lightly questioned. Whatever garment he wore, the power within him remained formidable. Before any could speak, the light dimmed. Shadows crossed the ice as a cloud seemed to pass over the sun. The bears looked up. The sky above was filled with gulls, an enormous wheeling host that descended in a spiraling curtain. At their center, borne carefully in the beaks of 100 birds, hung a great white pelt. They lowered it toward the king. Feathers brushed fur as the robe descended, settling upon his feathered back and shoulders. It draped over him with familiar weight. The gulls adjusted it here and there, smoothing it along his sides, tucking it beneath his chest. As they finished, an odd thing occurred. The fur, like the feathers before, seemed to take hold, mingling with the plumage, rooting once more into his skin. The king gave himself a slight shake. The skin hugged him as if it had never been removed. His coat now appeared as it had in former days, long white hair glistening under the pale sun, with perhaps a whisper of hidden down beneath. A murmur rose among the watching bears, a sound of wonder that swelled swiftly into a roar of approval. Before them stood, unmistakably, the figure they had long known, their king, restored in outward form as well as inward strength. One by one, then in groups, they bowed their heavy heads, acknowledging not just the return of his fur, but the demonstration of his courage and power. Closing reflection. What a king wears within. In the seasons that followed, the king of the polar bears ruled as he had before, with measured wisdom and the steady confidence of one who has faced death and lived. The gulls remained his close allies, and the bears no longer spoke lightly of his altered form. When whispers circulated about the battle with Woof, they carried less of gossip and more of reverence. For those who hear his tale, there lingers a lesson as enduring as ice, yet warmer than any fur. Outward appearance shifts, sometimes by choice, sometimes by cruel chance. A coat can be stripped away, a face can change, strength can falter, youth can fade. The world is quick to judge what it sees, to laugh at what seems strange, to assume that dignity can be measured by familiar shapes and surfaces. Yet the king's story shows that what truly matters lies beneath all that. The kindness that left food for the gulls did not depend upon his hair. The courage that faced the sting of man's weapon and the bitter cold of the ice did not melt when his hide was taken. The steady resolve with which he met Wolf's challenge rose from a heart long practiced in bearing responsibility. When the bears doubted him because his outside no longer matched theirs, they were not entirely wrong to desire a leader who reflected them. But the trial on the ice taught them, taught Wolf, taught the watching gulls, and may teach us that the worth of a king or of any soul is not settled by plumage or by pelt. Bragging, as Wolf discovered too late, is a shield made of thin ice. It cracks at the first hard blow. True strength moves quietly, speaks little, and reveals itself when need demands. So when we look upon others who seem changed, who wear garments unfamiliar to us, or who bear scars from battles we have not seen, this story invites us to remember the feathered king with the heart of a bear. For in the end, the garment he wore mattered less than the courage that wore it, and the kingdom that bowed before him did so not because his fur shone once more, but because beneath fur and feather alike, he remained steadfast, wise, and unafraid. For more stories that can help you relax, don't forget to like and subscribe.